The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, and the subject line stopped me cold. Estate distribution update. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter, still holding my coffee. This is the kind of story I never expected to live through myself. The kind that people on channels like this call a family revenge story. The kind where the paperwork knows more than the people do. Attached was a PDF from my father-in-law's estate attorney. I expected routine paperwork. Instead, the first page listed the inheritance distribution. 3 names: Daniel, his brother Evan, his brother Mark, my husband and his 2 brothers. My name wasn't anywhere on the document. I frowned and scrolled back to the top, thinking I'd opened the wrong file. Investment accounts, the Phoenix house, retirement funds, everything divided between the 3 brothers. Nothing for me. Which didn't make sense, because half of the lake house was supposed to be mine. I opened the attachment again, then again. Still the same. No mention of the lake house in northern Arizona, the property Daniel and I had spent nearly every summer at for the past decade. I set the coffee down and checked the sender address. The estate attorney, real address, real signature. My father-in-law had passed away 3 weeks earlier after a short illness. The last few weeks had been a blur of hospital visits, funeral planning, paperwork. Daniel had handled most of the financial conversations. Dad kept things simple, he told me one night after the funeral. Everything just gets split between the 3 of us. He did mention one small detail. Dad set something aside related to the lake house, he said. I didn't question it. Families get messy around inheritances. Standing in my kitchen that morning, though, something about the document felt wrong. I opened my banking app. The estate account Daniel had shown me a month earlier was still visible. Balance: $620,000. My stomach tightened. Last time I looked, it had held $840,000. I refreshed the screen. Same number. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Estate taxes, administrative fees, transfers between accounts. Still, I took a screenshot, then another. That afternoon, Daniel mentioned he and his brothers were meeting with the estate attorney the following week. Just paperwork, he said. He didn't mention the email I'd received. That night after dinner, I opened the PDF again on my laptop. Instead of reading the text, I checked the document properties the way I do with files at work. Creation date: 2 days earlier. Modified once. The editor name appeared in the metadata. Evan R. Carter, Daniel's younger brother. Evan wasn't the attorney. I scrolled through the document again. Certain language repeated throughout. Primary heirs, direct descendants. Nothing about spouses. Still nothing about the lake house. I opened my email search and typed the estate attorney's name. Older messages appeared. One from 8 months earlier. Subject line: trust confirmation. I didn't remember opening it. There was an attachment. When I opened it, the title at the top made my breath catch. Willow Ridge Property Trust. Underneath was the full address of the lake house. I sat down at the kitchen table and started reading. The trust had been created 3 years earlier. Grantor, my father-in-law. Beneficiaries, Daniel and me, jointly. I read that line again, then once more. 3 years earlier. which meant the lake house was never part of the estate. It had been removed from it entirely and placed into a trust, quietly, the way he handled everything important. No announcement, no production. I kept reading. Halfway down the second page, another line stopped me. Co-trustee. My name. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen. If the property was held in the trust, the estate distribution document would never mention it. That explained why the lake house was missing from the inheritance PDF. But that raised another question. Why hadn't Daniel mentioned the trust at all? I reopened the estate email. At the bottom, the attorney had included a list of recent estate transactions. One line stood out immediately. $210,000, property improvement allocation, Willow Ridge. 2 weeks earlier, 2 days after the funeral. I checked the estate account again. Balance still showed $620,000. The transfer had already happened. I took another screenshot. Then I reopened the trust document and read every page. The language was straightforward. No sale or transfer of the trust property could occur without approval from both trustees. Daniel and me. I hadn't approved anything. I kept reading page 6, a clause near the bottom. If one trustee attempted to sell or transfer trust property without the consent of the other, the remaining trustee could assume sole control of the trust. Immediately. I read it again, then once more. They had gone through my father-in-law's files. They had the original estate documents. But they had missed the trust entirely. They assumed I had no standing. That was the mistake. That night Daniel came home later than usual. He mentioned that he and his brothers had been discussing the lake house. "We might sell it," he said while grabbing a glass of water. "It's the easiest way to divide things." I kept my voice neutral. "Sell it through the trust?" He paused. Only for a second. Then he shrugged. "Yeah, something like that." After he went to bed, I opened the county property records website. Ownership listed exactly as the trust document stated. Willow Ridge Property Trust. No updates, no transfers. Then I noticed it again. The transaction line. $210,000. Authorized by Evan Carter. Evan had no authority over the trust, unless they thought I didn't either. The next morning, I contacted the attorney who had created the trust 3 years earlier. Not the estate lawyer, the trust attorney. I emailed him the document and the transaction record. Then I waited. Late that afternoon, he called. His first question was simple. "Did you authorize the $210,000 transfer connected to Willow Ridge?" "No." He paused briefly, then said, "You're listed as co-trustee. That transaction shouldn't have happened." He explained it calmly. Because the property was owned by the trust, it could not legally be sold or altered without approval from both trustees. And because someone had attempted to move funds connected to the property without my authorization, I had the right to assume control of the trust. Immediately. The paperwork took 2 days. During those 2 days, I checked the estate account constantly. On the second day, the balance dropped again. Another $40,000. Description: construction planning. I took another screenshot, forwarded it to the attorney. On the third day, he filed the documents transferring full trustee authority to me. He also sent formal notices, one to the estate attorney, one to Daniel, one to each of his brothers. The notice was short. It explained that the Willow Ridge Property Trust was not part of the estate, that the property could not be sold or altered, and that all authority over the trust now rested with the acting trustee, me. Daniel came home early that evening with the letter printed in his hand. He looked more confused than angry. "You called a lawyer?" I nodded. "You tried to sell the lake house," I said. He sat down slowly at the kitchen table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Evan said it would be simpler this way." I didn't argue. The documents had already been filed. The estate attorney contacted me the next morning. The brothers had assumed the lake house was still part of their father's estate. They had already discussed how to divide the sale proceeds without realizing the property had been moved into a trust years earlier, and without realizing I was listed as trustee. The $210,000 transfer was reversed within a week, the $40,000 shortly after. The estate distribution document was updated. The lake house was removed entirely. It had never belonged to the estate. A month later, I drove out to Willow Ridge alone. The gravel driveway looked the same. The pine trees behind the deck hadn't changed. Inside, the house was quiet, exactly the way I remembered it. My father-in-law had sat somewhere years before any of this happened and had a trust drawn up correctly, added my name, filed it properly, said nothing further about it. He just moved on, the way he always did when he'd already handled something. Legally, nothing had changed. The trust document still listed the same property, the same clause on page 6, and the same name under trustee authority, mine. Some people assume that when someone dies quietly, the arrangements they made disappear with them. They don't always check.